Exercise 1. It is understood that the global warming problem has been felt in daily life with water cuts, decreases of dam water levels, and the loss of agricultural production due to drought. Images of cracking soil becoming desert and emotional glacier scenes with polar bears and penguins are used to express the problem. These themes are used in ads to advertise products. A feeling is aroused in viewers that they can help starving polar bears unable to hibernate by consuming more, buying more, and thus preventing global warming. These ads with environmental themes can sometimes prevent the stimulation of people truly acting to correct environmental problems, and they suggest, instead, that the only way for people to express their sensitivity for these problems is through more consumption. In a capitalist system, it is obvious that companies whose aim is to make profit will not consider the environment as a field of responsibility. The understanding of first economy, then ecology, as remarked by former President of the United States, George W. Bush, forms the basis of green advertising. Advertising is essentially an economic phenomenon. However, it may seem to project much social responsibility. Exercise 2. Investments in the future are typically a difficult sell for businesses that are under pressure to make their numbers today. It can be an even greater challenge when economic times are tough. A few brave and flexible companies manage to take advantage of economic hardship to expand their market share, but most companies hunker down. Andrew Rozegi of the Kellogg School of Management notes that some forms of unmet customer needs are easier to discern during a period when customers are thinking harder about their spending. New value propositions can keep your company relevant in people's lives when they are otherwise scaling back. Moreover, in the volatile industry of telecommunications equipment, Cisco Systems CEO John Chambers directs his management to prepare for the upturn during hard times. If you wait to build growth paths until times are good, you'll find yourself behind those companies that took a consistent, disciplined approach to long-term growth. Exercise 3. Imagine the hostess pressing the chocolate cake upon you. Some parts of your brain want that glucose, while other parts care about your diet. Some parts look at the short-term gain, other parts at long-term strategy. The battle tips toward your emotions and you decide to dig in, but not without a contract. You'll eat it only if you promise to go to the gym tomorrow. Who's negotiating with whom? Aren't both parties in the negotiation you? Freely made decisions that bind you in the future are what philosophers call a Ulysses contract. As a concrete example, one of the first steps in breaking an alcohol addiction is to ensure, during sober reflection, that there is no alcohol in the house. The temptation will simply be too great after a stressful workday or on a festive Saturday or a lonely Sunday. People make Ulysses contracts all the time, and this explains the immediate and lasting success of Merkel Landis's Christmas Club. When people handed over their capital in April, they were acting with a wary eye toward their October selves, who they knew would be tempted to blow the money on something selfish instead of deferring to their generous, gift-giving December selves. Exercise 4. Some ethicists think the motive of duty involves an obsession with abstract morality, a kind of fetishizing that amounts to a vice. Imagine, for example, that Michael visits a friend in the hospital ultimately because he just wants to do the right thing. Michael exhibits moral integrity, but wouldn't it be more appropriate, more virtuous, to just be motivated ultimately by a concern for his friend's well-being, i.e. altruism? Or consider patients with scrupulosity, a form of obsessive-compulsive disorder that commonly involves an excessive concern with doing the right thing. Suppose Bridget's anxiety about violating moral rules leads her to have an overwhelming concern to make sure she's not accidentally poisoning her customers' food. That's considerate. But isn't the concern to be moral leading to a problematic motivation for preparing safe food? Shouldn't she just be motivated by a concern for others' well-being rather than obsessing over avoiding immorality? Such examples may suggest that the motive of duty alienates us from the personal attachments that often provide us with moral obligations in the first place. Exercises 5 through 7. It was early Saturday morning, February 10th, 1906, when Joseph and his brother Asa started their journey from Heflin to Wedowee, more than 30 miles away. Joseph had very carefully packed his best clothes in a small black suitcase that his stepmother had brought to their home more than 8 years earlier. This was a happy day for Joseph, because he was going for his bride, Narcissus. Daybreak was on the horizon as they mounted their horses. They knew it would take most of the day to travel the 30 or more miles from Heflin to Wedowee on horseback. They were aware of that because of the rough terrain and the mountains. Not only the twisted trails, but also wild animals and the winter icy cold would make it hard and long to get from Heflin to Wedowee on horseback. However, fear did not enter Joseph's mind today. All his thoughts were of the beautiful girl he had met only 6 months earlier at the choir they both had attended at Mount Moriah Baptist Church. He smiled as he remembered how he thought he heard angels singing. With a chuckle, he said it was no angel. It was Narcissus. He added Narcissus had then, and still does, have the most beautiful voice. The thought of this beautiful girl saying yes to Joseph when he asked her to marry him made the long journey a warm and happy time, despite the problems they had going over the mountains. There was once a time that a mountain lion scared Asa's horse. Asa fell off his horse and tumbled down a deep ravine. He climbed back up the mountain. He took the reins of his horse and told Joseph that he was going back home. Joseph pleaded with him to stay with him for the rest of their journey. He said, "We can protect each other, and we are over halfway. And what else can happen?" Little did Joseph know that the mountain lion that had scared Asa's horse was not about to leave them alone. They were almost at the foot of the mountain when they heard the mountain lion scream. They knew that they could not ignore the scream. It was the scream of attack. They both feared for their life, as well as the life of their horses. They knew what they had to do. They had to kill the mountain lion. Joseph said he did not know which one shot first. But he did know that he and Asa both shot. They rode like the wind to get away. Each one was hoping they had shot the mountain lion. They were so scared they did not look back. The rest of the journey was a peaceful one, with no more mountain lions. Exercise 8. Within Europe, bee hunting was especially common in heavily forested regions, such as Western Russia and Hungary, where it was a critical part of the craft of hollow tree beekeeping. Forest beekeepers used various kinds of bee traps to catch one or more bees, have them load up on honey smeared inside the trap, and then release them one at a time, and follow them back to their nest, usually in a hollow tree. The discoverer would carve his ownership mark in the tree's bark, cut a door in the tree's trunk to access the bee's nest cavity, and periodically climb the tree and collect some honeycombs. Bee hunting was also popular in North America, following the introduction of the honeybee from Europe in the early 1600s. North American bee hunters used the same methods for finding wild colonies as had been practiced in Europe for centuries, and they rarely made repeated harvests of the honey from the colonies they found. Instead, they usually felled the trees occupied by the bees, bee trees, and stole all their honeycombs, often killing the colony in the process. Exercise 9. The scope of philanthropy goes far beyond the grant-making of foundations. Despite the eye-popping size of large foundations and the growth in the total number of foundations, the overwhelming majority of total giving, at least in the United States, comes from living donors making charitable contributions. Americans donated more than $390 billion to qualified nonprofit organizations in 2016. Of that total, giving by living individuals accounted for $281 billion, or 72%. Estimates suggest that nearly all Americans donate some amount of money every year. A small donor does not wield the same kind of power as does a big philanthropist. Yet the distribution of small giving in total matters a great deal, fueling the operation of a significant slice of nonprofit organizations. And small donors enjoy the same discretion as a big philanthropist and also benefit from tax incentives for their giving. Any consideration of philanthropy must go beyond the Rockefellers and Gateses of the world and attend to the amount and significance in a democratic society of ordinary charitable giving. Exercise 10. Natural scientists don't spend their time agonizing about their methodology. They believe, with good reason, that the methods they have evolved for understanding physical matter are adequate for discovering the truth. Most economists take the same line. Their world is peopled with human robots, and they aim to establish laws about the behavior of these machine-like creatures. A complete set of laws is not yet to hand, but they will catch up with the natural scientists in the end, perhaps after the neuroscientists have completed their work on the brain. They are loath to admit that the material they study and try to understand does not behave with the law-like regularity of natural phenomena. Humans are uniquely inventive animals. They are aware of who they are, reflect on their experiences, set themselves goals, relate to each other and their environments in complicated ways, puzzle about the morality of their actions, adapt creativity to new situations. By the exercise of their minds and imaginations, they modify the future, their own and the world's. Their games cannot be sussed out. The more secure laws of economics are tendencies at best. Most economists think they can establish laws of human behavior that are similar to laws of nature, established by natural scientists in terms of regularity. But human behavior is variable because of human-specific traits like inventiveness. Exercise 11. One of the most influential and perhaps surprising developments in environmental policy in recent decades is the idea that we can protect the environment from the negative impacts of economic development by making environmental protection itself more economic. The goal is to reduce environmental harm not by preventing it, but by pricing it. Want to build a housing development on a piece of land threaded with streams? With an environmental market in place, you can do that as long as you pay to offset the damage through restoration of comparable streams elsewhere. Or, in an example that may be more familiar, want to keep emitting greenhouse gases? Fine. You just have to buy carbon credits produced by reducing emissions at another site. Starting in the early 1990s, U.S. environmental policy has supplemented command and control regulation with market-based approaches in an attempt to improve conservation outcomes. There are now many environmental markets in the United States and internationally that are intended to improve conservation outcomes for everything, from prairies and streams to woodpeckers and flowering shrubs. Exercises 12 through 14. On an unseasonably warm day in February 2017, Lindsay walked slowly up the wooden broadwalk to her front door. Her mind raced with thoughts, and several emotions competed for her attention as her friend Annie, who was watching Lindsay's kids, greeted her at her front door. "How did the appointment go?" she asked. Weeks of unusual symptoms led Lindsay to that day, and a visit with her physician to discuss a diagnosis. Lindsay leaned her back onto the cool surface of the kitchen counter, while she relayed the details to her friend. The doctor said all my symptoms could be stemming from anxiety and depression. Lindsay hesitantly told her friend. The truth was, she still was grappling with the idea herself. She had convinced herself only a physical illness could be causing the shaky hands, racing heart, lack of appetite, and sleep deprivation. The next sentence was even harder to get past her lips. The doctor prescribed me an antidepressant. Fear, loneliness, and defeat permeated her words. She felt discouraged, anxious, and alone. "Oh, good," Annie exclaimed. Her reaction shocked Lindsay. Lindsay had prepared herself for a pitying look, silence, or a quick change of subject. Her dear friend proceeded to tell her how counseling and medication helped her through some rough patches in her life. While the internet only shared stories of mental health medicine having gone wrong, Annie painted a positive picture of how much treatment had helped her. More important than her testimony of successful medical care was her openness in sharing her struggles with depression. Annie made Lindsay feel understood and known. Fear and shame slid away as Lindsay realized she had friends in this hard place. Lindsay thought that mental health wasn't something people talked openly about in society, leading those living with mental disorders to feel lonely and misunderstood. Annie's courage in sharing her story with her friend had led Lindsay to be open with others about her own challenges. Lindsay hoped she could be the same encouraging and empowering friend to others that Annie had been to her.